I'm Bob Turner. I'm going to be talking about what I simply call natural science images. And my little definition, at least for this afternoon, it'll be landscape images and critters. I'm no longer a working biomedical photographer. I've been very fortunate. I retired 6 years ago. And I've spent a lot of time in my leisure time going out and doing imaging. So I'm going to show a series of images, first from Southern California, and then some images from a couple of national parks that I've visited in the last few years. But before I get into those images, I thought it would be appropriate to show the type of equipment that I'm working with. I always take with me two Nikon D53s, which are the DX format. I take along three lenses, typically my 18-200, my 200-500 zoom, and the 1.4 teleconverter. And of course, as many of you know, I do digiscoping, attaching a digital camera to a field scope, so I take my Nikon 1000 millimeter scope. My tripod is a Gitzo 3532 carbon fiber, 3-section legs, and finally the gimbal head, which is also carbon fiber, which has proved to be my best system. So I'm going to start by showing some images here right around Encinitas, California, where I live. It's about 25 miles north of downtown San Diego. So here we have a spotted towhee that was literally over by the golf course. And then we had a red-crested pochard. We have a lot of migratory birds in our area because we're fortunate to live on what's called the Pacific Flyway. Then we go out to Lake Hodges, which is about 15 miles east of where I live. And I was hoping to photograph some acorn woodpeckers, but they had, pardon the expression, flown the coop. And who moved in but some European starlings? I was able to get there and get some shots of the adult coming back to the nest, feeding the young ones. Now, many times that when I go out to a park or a regional park setup, I only find domestic animals, but I still shoot. The reason being, practice, practice, practice. And I'll just practice photographing these, in this case, domestic geese, because next thing you know, when you're out, you may have the opportunity to photograph a merganser. This is a diving duck. And as you'll see from the top of its crest, if it had just dove down to look for food, comes back up, it's got drops of water on its back, and its normal dry crest is now all wet. So that's that guy. Then you might recognize this from our competition last night. This is a peregrine falcon. We're down at the Torrey Pines Reserve. And the falcon is just taking off from its cavity nest over here. And just for the record, these peregrine falcons have the capability of flying 242 miles per hour. So you got to be there at the right place at the right time to get them. Moving on back out by Rancho Cuyamaca, here's an acorn woodpecker. And I draw your attention to the actual acorns that they are hiding next to their cavity nest. And here we have a northern pintail, which just landed right in front of me. I'm just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And I was using my 500 millimeter lens. Next image is a digiscope shot. These are black-necked stilts. They were way across on the other side of the lagoon. but I was able to capture them foraging. Then we had a red-tailed hawk. This was out at Lake Hodges. And as you may know, we've had a very bad drought the last 5-6 years. It's only been somewhat replenished in the last 4 or 5 months. But I was fortunate that this bird was soaring overhead next to a background of red sandstone that was completely, left barren because of the drought. So the coloring in the bird, I thought, complemented nicely on the image. My most recent project, which took 6 visits to a great horned owl's nest, finally resulted in getting the best I could get. We're 40 feet down from this nest, and we're 40 feet away from the nest, and I finally got a shot of all 4 nestlings basically looking in the same direction. It's high noon, the sun is coming down, very harsh lighting, but I finally got that shot. All the time I'm being kept an eye on, or 2, by the mother, and that was a fun project to do. Now, in the news recently, out at Death Valley, and in this case, the Anza Borrego Desert, here's the type of shot you probably saw on your national news about the super bloom. And in fact, the foreground to the edge of the field, that's about 100 yards. This is shooting with an 18, but for scale, I can't even come close to covering the 3/4 of a mile that was there. And to be honest, I want to share this last local picture, which is really what you would see if you go out to the desert, because you still have the dead areas here that are not going to get any blossoms this year, interspersed with different types of flowers and shrubs, and of course, some areas that barely have a little touch of green in there. But otherwise, my point is, there's not flowers everywhere. Okay, I'd like to move on. I want to share one last image from 3 years ago when Chip Hedgecock and I went to Yellowstone National Park, and I was able to get some shots of the pronghorn, and in this case, they were virtually playing Ring Around the Rosie. He was following her, and they kept going around and around and around, and I think I've shown some other images of just the male a couple of times. So that was 3 years ago. And then 2 years ago, Kevin Mikowski and I went to Rocky Mountain National Park. This is Long's Peak, and we went there in the 3rd week of September. Foliage was kicking in, it was beautiful. And I draw your attention to, yes, the tree line, and then the meadows. We had different environments to check out. And we spent from 6 in the morning until 6 or 7 at night trying to track down different animals. And indeed, it was during the elk rut. And we came across this, I'm going to estimate, 3 to 4 year old, relatively young buck, as big as he might appear, along one of the trails. But we also went higher up, looking for other animals, and the beautiful scenery and the mix of meadows and trees as we got higher. I would estimate we're at about 8,000 foot here. And along the way, yes, this is from last year's bioimage, a pine squirrel. And then going further up, closer to just over 10,000 feet. Reminder here, folks, commercial airline pilots are required to have oxygen on when they're above 10,000 feet. And walking around up there carrying all that equipment, you feel it. But I do want to point out same as at Anza Borrego Desert. Yeah, doesn't that look pretty much the same? You don't have water, you don't have nourishment, you're not going to have any plants. And this is the last of the shrubbery, and then the trees are way down. And yes, a little bit of snow was left over from the past year. So we decided, yeah, we'd probably better stay down in the meadows and see the elk that are abundant here and there. And then traveling about, we got to see a variety of little areas that were just riddled with beautiful foliage on the season. And one of our walks, I was able to come upon a red-napped sapsucker, which does a very, I find, incredulous behavior. It does not strip the bark all the way around the tree, a technique that I believe is called girdling. That will kill a tree. They're smart enough to leave connections, but in the areas that are exposed, the sap oozes out. It's like flypaper. They create this little matrix. The birds come along later, and they have a smorgasbord of insects to eat. And one of the things we were trying to do, we went through a number of bogs like this, looking and looking and looking for moose. Didn't find any. But we did find the elk that were abundant, and this is one that's, I don't have audio, but he's bugling. And the aspens were just gorgeous, really pretty. And then finally from Rocky Mountain, this is a stellar jay that was perched in one of the pine trees. So let's move forward. September of this year, or this past year, 2016, Kevin and I went to, of all places, Glacier National Park. The glaciers were the least impressive thing we saw. I'm not going to get into a political statement here, but if there's ever an incident or a picture worth 10,000 tellings, then I have a few images you're going to see. I won't dwell on it, but I do believe global warming has caused these glaciers that typically would cover the entire mountaintops are eroding. They're melting away. So, but the good news for our trip, we did see our moose, finally. And again, we got up real early in the morning and we would go hunting for these different critters. And we sure found them. And the mountains were different there. Much steeper, much more difficult to traverse. And we kept ourselves under 3 miles on hikes. But carrying the equipment, we were able to get some pretty nice shots of the foliage and such. And like I said, the moose that were, I was within 12 feet of a bull moose, and walked right by me because he had his eye on a doe that was out in the water. We got early to the different ponds, trying to beat them to the spots and get set up. And again, there's our glaciers. And yes, here's our bull moose in the background coming into the pond. And later they traversed off into the woods, and it was like your place or mine. I would like to, again, mention about the glaciers. We did get to see them. And these buttes that were there were just spectacular. It was great. We also tried to find bears. And sure enough, this was one of the grizzly bears, a female with its yearling. And another time, and I don't always show all the pictures that make it, but there's one picture that I can show you I'd like to share. And there it is. I had a female black bear with a yearling. I'm all set. ready to shoot, card full. Now, this is Hidden Lake, which is up, about 6,700 foot. Beautiful place. We hiked up to that. And then we were treated with some mountain goats that were traversing through with Hidden Lake in the background. And we went to a variety of environs where we had, again, the glaciers, waterfalls, streams, beautiful foliage. Extremely lucky on our weather, not one drop of rain until the day we went home to drive to the airport. And here's one of the other female mountain goats foraging. We also went north up to St. Mary's Lake and got a chance to go down to the end of this lake. And then we went up into Waterton National Park, which is in Canada. And this shot is, I'll be the first to acknowledge, doctored, as in it's approximately 7:30, 8 o'clock in the early evening. It's twilight. This black bear came down off the hill. I was at ISO 12,800. This is about an eighth of a second at f8. And I was lucky to get a shot. And the bear kept coming, but there was about 5 or 6 of us, and 4 or 5 of us had bear spray, so I kept photographing. And I'd like to end my portion of my natural sciences images. This is Logan Pass. I had just finished walking about 3.5 miles, and I saw this rock right here, and I said, oh man, that's perfect. It's right at my height, so I can just sit down with all this equipment. I'm sitting there and like this, and it's like, oh, that's not bad. What is that? Oh, that's a Kodak moment. So I took this shot. It's one of my favorite shots from that trip. So I'm going to conclude my talk, but I'll stop at this point to take any questions that people might have.